Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Adobo and Avocados. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven. I've been told that I can lead this episode. Imagine that. Well, I'll try not to abuse that privilege. And today I'm with Marie Cruz over there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marie. You might hear my dog barking in the background. Of all the times that he's gonna bark, he chose the perfect time. But yes,
That's why I got the privileges.
yeah, streaming here live from London, and yeah, we have the amazing opportunity here to introduce our amazing guest, the one and only Abby Bangser.
Hi,
Yay!
everyone.
Yay!
Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Abby Bangser, as Marie so nicely said. I'm also streaming from London, despite this accent. So I'm an American who moved over a little less than 10 years ago. As when I was working for a company, and I've been through a few companies since while here. And I work in software delivery, specifically under a whole bunch of different titles, but usually around how to help organizations and teams deliver software faster and safer at the same time. And so today I'm doing that as a principal engineer with Syntasso, which is a startup based in London. And we are building a product called Cradix, which helps platform engineers build platforms that are bespoke to their business. So, trying to get past that whole build versus buy dilemma and just focus on getting the right thing for the organizations. So,
Awesome. Well, that was a lot of things, but how did you get started in tech? Because that's, you're obviously very well accomplished and you have a lot of experience, but how was it that you got your first tech job? Did you always know that that was something you wanted to do?
absolutely not. This is a story that doesn't often. I just the way you said that, I get to go back. I'm going to enjoy the going back in history. So
Absolutely.
when I was about 11 or 12 years old at school, 10 or 11 years old at school, I did a web development course, which people of different generations have different strong memories of getting into tech. But mine was on the old Macs that were really colorful, and learning how to do HTML and CSS. And I won an award for like basically working really hard and got a big fat black book of like, I think it was HTML 2.0 or something. And my parents, who were not techie at all in their worlds, were like, "Good job, kid," and didn't know how to then like kind of nurture that, and I didn't know that that was
Mhm.
something that was a career journey or whatever. So I sort of distanced from tech a lot,
Mhm.
unintentionally from that age. Just wasn't in school as much, and so on until I went into my first job after university, and I was in investments actually, so financial investments. And in that job, there's a whole lot of data analysis. But the thing about data analysis is you need the data. And as an
Mhm.
entry level person, I was doing a lot of the data collection and the like kind of cleaning of the data and making sure that we could create analysis on top of it. So I actually wound up writing a lot of what I sometimes describe as Selenium written in VB script is maybe the like closest thing I can describe this very proprietary tool as. And I loved it. I thought it was really interesting, and I naturally was thinking about like how can I reuse some of the things I'm doing, and how can I make this something that will be easier for me to use over time or to grow. And I wasn't doing it well, to be clear, but I was at least thinking about those challenges. And when I was talking about that with a friend, over a coffee, she was actually a legal assistant within a tech company and was talking. She's like, I'm pretty sure we have this whole like training program where people can come in and learn how to be software developers. Maybe you should apply. And so I did. I read a couple chapters of Head First Java and walked into the ThoughtWorks offices in Chicago to apply to be a developer, and they showed me how much I had to learn in a very thankfully kind way. I got my first insight into what IDEs look like, into what testing is, all a part of the interview process. And at the end of the day, I just didn't quite have enough experience to be a software developer yet, even in their entry level program. but they saw opportunity and potential, and so they brought me in the QA role. So that's how I got to my first job in tech, was as a kind of a weird, windy road, but yeah.
No, that's so cool because I was an economics major as well, and I totally understand that it was about a lot of data, and I thought I will never apply this. And while it's true that I've never had an economics related job, the data analysis part is always there. There's so much data in observability and in performance testing. Like there are more things that are related than might appear at first glance.
Yeah.
Before we get into a lot of, I definitely want to. There was a few things that you mentioned that I want to get into, but before we do, maybe you don't know that Marie and I are actually Filipinos originally. We were both born in the Philippines, but we have both kind of left the Philippines and lived more of our lives outside it. It doesn't mean that that Filipino streak hasn't left us, though. And one of the things that really reminds us of home and centers us is this thing called adobo, which is the unofficial national dish of the Philippines. It is some sort of meat or like even vegetables that's like marinated in vinegar. It tastes better than it sounds.
Sounds
But it
good. So
is
that's something to say.
but I think for us and a lot of Filipinos, it's just like, oh yeah, that just takes us back and just kind of calms us. What is that thing for you? Whether it's a food or like something that you do or a person, because you're also someone that is away from where you originally were born.
Yeah. Oh, that's tough. So I definitely talk a lot. I have a lot of fun conversations about what is the difference in food in particular between the UK and the US, and just life as well. Because so many people think like, oh, why'd you go to the UK? That's like not even going abroad. And I'm like, oh well, you've clearly not spent much time with British people. It is a very different culture, and yes, we share the same dictionary, but that's, you know, there's some things that are very interesting between the two cultures. Um, but maybe one of the things I'll just like say, there's probably a lot of things that are hard to think of, but I'm very excited because I'm going home to visit my family in a couple of weeks. So they live in the East Coast, a bit north of New York. And specifically, I'm going to celebrate my grandmother's 100th birthday, which is very
Wow.
exciting. And what we're going to be
Wow.
doing is we're going to be having, I'm very excited because I'm going to take her out for ice cream sundaes. So we're going to have, there's a special ice cream shop back in my hometown that had homemade ice cream, homemade whipped cream, and homemade hot fudge. So everything was kind of
Oh.
homemade. It's a single shop, not a chain, and those Sundays are something that like I grew up with, and so I haven't had one in, I don't know, like a decade. Um, but very excited for a grandma Sunday in a few weeks.
Wow. Do you have a specific like ice cream flavor that you always order, or is it
Moose
always
tracks. Absolutely. If it exists as an option, which it does at this ice cream
What is
shop, Moose Tracks. It is like
moose tracks?
vanilla ice cream with like little mini peanut butter cups. So like little
oh.
mini Reese's peanut butters essentially, and I think swirls of other stuff in there. So
Mm.
I'm like, I never grew up like all these like very mature people that can have like fruity sorbets and ice creams. I'm like, how much chocolate can I get on my face right now? That is like
Yes.
me eating ice cream. So, yes.
Yeah.
So something
I don't think
chocolatey, something peanut
yeah,
buttery. Those are usually going to
right.
get me as a win.
I don't think we
Growing
have
up
that
is so
flavor
overrated.
combination here in the UK or even there in the
Yeah.
Netherlands.
It sounds
Yeah.
Canadian.
The Moose Tracks. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's definitely around. Like I'm definitely. It's not like only this shop has it. But it's definitely also, if you're gonna have 5 flavors, it won't be one of the options, right? So,
Mm.
um, yeah, it's a bit different.
Yeah. So like how did you I mean to kind of go back to what you were mentioning, how did you get from testing to observability and platform engineering?
Mhm.
Because a lot of
Oh,
people
you're
think of those
winding.
as very different disciplines.
Yeah, I think, and I can appreciate why. Just to start out, like I don't think this is something that could have happened in the snap of a fingers or an overnight, right? This is a journey. But I think it's a natural one. And I think it's one that I've definitely run into other people who have been on that same journey, which gives me confidence that it wasn't crazy or ridiculous. So I think the big thing is that whenever you are progressing through learning, you tend to choose to kind of go really deep in something or tend to go really up. So, like the more kind of broad in your impact in that area, or you try to look at where you can progress, like take that learning and move into slightly different arenas, right? And those are, in my experience, so sort of three of the directions you can go when you start to grasp a concept. And I think that what the reason I've landed here is because my most common direction was to see how it translated into the next, like into a parallel or uh, another kind of aspect that was close to what I was doing. So, more concretely, because that was all very hand wavy, I started in QA, and because I had applied as a software developer, and because of the background of ThoughtWorks with very heavy TDD, so test driven
Mhm.
development, and BDD, behavior driven development culture, writing test automation was the expected outcome of most QAs, and it was mine. I wanted to be write code, so that made sense. But I had some really amazing mentors that were on projects with me early, and they didn't tell me what to do. They just asked me questions around, is that the most valuable thing you could be doing right now, and really
Mm.
helped me understand how to make decisions about what to spend my time on for quality. And they were maybe nudging me as well towards realizing that writing test automation is one version of bringing quality to a project, but it's something that is writing code, which developers already do, and they could continue doing, and they could apply some of their code writing skills there. Whereas something that I brought to the table that was maybe different than some of the skills of the rest of my teammates was that I had a kind of analytical mindset and a perspective coming in from a different angle that could identify risk earlier in the process, raise those concerns, figure out what might need to be automated, but maybe not do the automation. So that evolution happened. And then I very quickly, as I was talking about risk, realized that risk isn't just about the feature that you're writing in your tests, on your local machine and putting in your test environment, which I might be exploratory testing. It actually matters, like how we test it. Like if I'm writing automated tests in an environment and I don't understand the state of that environment, like what's the
Mhm.
value of those automated or exploratory tests? So I started getting very into like understanding the ecosystem of releasing software. So DevOps pipelines is maybe the phrase that was used at the time. And from there, I was like, well, what's at the end of this pipeline? Oh, right, it's the users. What happens if I've like validated everything in all these environments and I know the environments are providing us value because I understand how they were built and all these things, but like users are still unhappy with something. What does that mean? And that's what led me to observability and later into SRE to try and think about that from a systems point of view. And platform engineering, in my opinion, is trying to help organizations manage all of these kinds of challenges in a more sustainable, maintainable, and scalable way. So I think they're all sort of natural transitions, but they all definitely take me slightly away from the place I was first.
Yeah. That's a really interesting career progression because I know some people who is still starting in terms of their testing career journey. They've heard of these different, terminologies or buzzwords like observability, monitoring. There's a lot of like testing is just one aspect. There's more to testing. So I guess my question is, how would you explain observability to someone who is fairly new to testing, like fairly new to tech, and they want to learn more about it?
That's a great question. So I think there's probably layers of that definition to talk about. So I think the number one thing is, how do you understand what's happening in a system? Is maybe the first place I'd start. And there's nuances there that we can get into, but um, I think depending on where you are in your career, depending on your personal interests and skills, this may start by you thinking about the log output that you can see. or thinking
Mhm.
about how to use debuggers in your local environment, or metrics around what's going on and things like that. Like just trying to get any sort of insight into like what is actually happening here. Do I have an application graph that I can understand what applications talk to each other? Maybe that's a part of your observability. And I think there can be a lot of if you stick your head too far up before you understand the lay of the land, there can be a lot of kind of firefights around whether or not you should use these words in reference to observability and those kinds of things. And that's why I want to start with like, if you're entering, observability is about understanding your system. There's lots of amazing things we can dive into from there, but I think making sure people start there.
I love what you said about how it felt like a natural transition, a natural progression of things. I very much felt the same way. So my background is in performance testing, and when I started, the way that I used to do it was just like black box testing. I would write the script, I would send it over to the system, and then I would get stuff back and analyze it, but I didn't really know what was happening. And there's also value in that. There is something to be said for that separation, but you'll get to a point when you're doing that where it really is so much more helpful to also see into that black box. And then I started to get into like you said, looking at the logs or looking at resource utilization. And then to be able to do that, though, I had to learn how to instrument the system. So for others, that means how to get that data in the first place, because sometimes you don't even have that data to look at. So that really made me realize that sometimes that's all that's necessary. There's this weird thing where once you make something observable and there's a nice dashboard and people are looking at it, sometimes things magically get better. And it's because everyone's looking at the same data, and unconsciously or consciously, they're suddenly, like when they check in code, they check again to see, did that move the needle one way or another? And I thought that that was magical. And I thought this is something that could already provide value even before you test. And then there's also the issue of, when you're testing something, how do you justify the value of your test if you didn't know what the state was before? So then I started to think you really should get like a picture before, do your test, and then a picture during and after the test. And that stuff is only done through observability.
You're touching on so many awesome points. Like, so you mentioned black box, and from the testing world, I'm familiar with the idea of black box and white box testing, and maybe we've got better names for these things now. To be clear, I've been out of that
Yeah.
naming game part of the QA game for a little while now. But what you're talking about, interestingly, is that nuance I sort of hinted at, where people will start to be like, oh well, is that true observability or not, and things,
Mhm.
because actually, in my opinion, like logs and the systems metrics that you were talking about are part of the observability story, because they, in my opinion, actually are a part of black box testing, in the sense that you've sent a test off and the system is giving you some level of readings without you having to know how the system works. The readings that are available to you include systems metrics and logs and other things. Now, what you added to that, though, is where it gets interesting into white box testing. So you said sometimes I had to go in and add those information. I had to go in and instrument that and actually say, I would like systems metrics and I would like an additional log here and I would like these things. That is where understanding the inside of the system matters. And I just want to like completely double down on the idea that black box testing is super valuable and is not meant, this is not a situation where if you are not writing code, you are not bringing value. Your
Mhm.
ability to say, there is a gap in my ability to determine the success or failure of our system right now, or to debug the customer request that has just come in because I cannot see anything from outside the system. That is where you start to get to observability. That is where you start to say, I cannot ask questions of my system without changing the system, without going in and adding instrumentation or doing something to it. And that shows us a gap in our observability, which we can then fix by instrumenting and putting things in. So yeah, I love that story. I think that was really spot on for my experiences with observability. So
Yeah. This sort of reminded me of because one of our colleagues here in Grafana, she's created like a Grafana for beginner series, and like the first episode was around what is observability. And I remember I watched that, and she compared observability to, let's say you go to a doctor and they're trying to diagnose your symptoms. So then they take a lot of your, blood pressure, they take blood tests, and then if they still can't figure out, then they ask you to do like a scan so then they can see what's really happening on the inside. So it's sort of similar, like if we apply that to like software systems, like observability is really the same thing. Like we use different tools to try and figure out what is happening inside our system, because that's going to better inform our testing as well. But like some people might sort of say, okay, if we're doing testing already, we don't need observability. Or if we're doing observability, we don't need to do much testing. Like, what's your sort of stance around that?
that's a great one. So taking us back to that really good example from your colleague about kind of trying to figure out what's wrong with you. Why are you ill? Why are you getting those headaches? Why are you feeling in a certain way? Right? I would I would hypothesize, and I haven't seen it, so I don't want to make assumptions about how they worded this, but that if you're doing a blood test for example, these 5 things. Oh, I want to check the sugar levels and the I don't know, whatever. I have a thyroid problem, thyroid levels and whatever else, right? You've got these like 5 things you're checking for, and they're not in there. And then they send you back for another blood test. As a needle phobic person myself, no, no, no. I don't what? Why didn't you ask me for all of them the first time? What are you talking about? So I think that in some ways I look at testing as that sort of like poke and see what you get back, and then poke again and see what you get back situation. And that is extremely valuable. Again, this is not a value statement. This is a how do I view the 2 different activities. Observability would be like having a consistent and a regular access to blood from the person. This sounds horrific, just so you know, to me, but let's say that was possible. And therefore, you didn't have to ask them every time you wanted to check for something because it was just available to you, that information that was available to you, and you could check for things that you didn't know to check for. So, like, something happens in the scientific world, and all of a sudden, tomorrow, there's a new test we can run for a new disease that we never before could identify. If we have testing, we need to go back and get blood, and we need to go and run that new test. If we have observability, we have access to blood already because we already have that sort of exposed as information. And now we can run that new custom test without ever actually changing anything about our system. We still are getting access to the blood. We continue to get access to it. We used to get access to it. Everything's still the same when it comes to our system. And this is the really tough, challenging question within the observability space. And since this is very focused around your question, Marie, around testers, the thing that I think lands the most with testers I speak to, my friends and my colleagues, is the conversation about what is monitoring versus what is observability in the observability space is very, very similar to the conversation around what is checking and what is testing in the testing space. So for those that are on half of that battle and are like, what are you talking about the other half? In the testing world, there's a conversation of like, if you know what the outcome's supposed to be and you know what the inputs are, so like this is something that could be automated, you're not really testing something, you're just checking. You're checking that given these sets of very concrete inputs, you're going to get these sets of very concrete outputs. And that has value to it, but it's slightly different value than I wonder what is the experience of a new user onboarding. Let me test what this experience looks like and what the like and let me gather information that we can then use to determine if it is a positive, negative, or neutral outcome, because we don't have a set outcome. Like we have a information gathering exercise to then evaluate. That's checking versus testing. Monitoring versus observability, monitoring being like, I know the question I want to ask and I'm outputting information very specifically to answer that question. So I want to test your blood for sugar levels. I'm going to ask that question. I'm going to ask it every 10 minutes forever so that I can track it and then I can determine if it's a healthy level or not. Observability is I don't know what questions I want to ask. I would like to be able to ask the questions I need to ask without having to do any additional work. So just give me access to that blood. That's the useful stuff. I'll deal with the questions later. And so they're actually very similar kinds of, I think, theoretical challenges around how much are you supposed to know ahead of time of what you want to ask and how much are you on like a learning journey that is going to be challenging you to gather more information and ask different questions over time.
That's a really insightful comparison. I really like that. I know for myself, like on the health analogy, there are some things that I know because I know my body, and for example, have a history with asthma. So I have to watch that carefully. Whenever I get sick, I do sometimes have to do these lung capacity tests. Because I have previously taken maintenance medication, and I have stopped that, but it doesn't mean that I will never need it. I'm a little bit more careful about that, and for that I go and do regular tests, but I can't sort of have like a continual feed of lung capacity tests. I would have some sort of tube attached to me at all times.
Equally
So in that
horrific to the blood
case,
option.
yeah, in that case, testing is essential for me. I know this is a problem. I know this is a bigger risk for me specifically, and it makes sense to explicitly test for it. But there are all sorts of things like I have an Oura ring that monitors like blood pressure and my like my HRV and my sleep and whatever. I have a smartwatch that measures my steps. That's for the things that I don't know I might have issues with. So I might, suddenly get a fever, and then I can look at the statistics from my Oura after the fact and be like, "Oh yeah, my temperature had been rising the last few days." But I didn't think to check for my temperature then. It's more like I'm glad I had that information because now I can go back. And then when I go to my doctor, I'm like, "Oh, this has actually been happening for a few days, even though I just felt it today." So I think that's when both observability and testing are really important as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think what you're describing uh with the like you go get tested regularly because you know of a known problem or a known risk and you want to validate that really specifically. That's why I say I don't have a value statement to say that monitoring is a bad idea. That going in and consistently checking for the thing you know you want to check for, that has value and you should do that when you know that there is a increased risk in an area, whether that be health or systems, technical systems. The thing that you're also being really, in my opinion, really like astute and like great about is that you're saying probably there's a risk that something else I could get ill in a different way. So instead of just thinking the only way I'll ever get ill is in the way I've used to get ill, or in the way that I can dream up how I might get ill, let's just like gather some information that will give me the data that will help me explore if I start to feel ill in the future in directions I can't imagine today. And that's the observability side. So
Nice. I love where this is heading because like we can really see where testing and observability is, quite similar in a sense of there's some sense of exploration in both two areas. I remember, Nicole, we did that episode where we spoke in our native
In
language.
Tagalog, yes.
Yeah, so we're trying to also talk about testing and observability, and one aspect of that is how is testing different from observability. And I remember we talked about the car analogy where, like, we can test in, you know great conditions, like for example if we're driving in a racetrack, weather is always nice, there's no other cars, the roads are not bumpy, but then that's not really the experience in real, like driving. Like you'll have other drivers who are gonna be, speeding, different weather conditions. It could be bumpy. So that's where you need observability, because you need to understand the different conditions that your users are exposed to. And I think we can mimic that as much as possible in our different environments, but to an extent, we still need that live sort of like production data to really inform us whether the data that we have as part of our testing really matches with what's happening for our users when they use something in the different production environments. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you did ask me specifically that question, but I'm glad I didn't answer you because
You
I think you answered it better than I could have. So this worked out well for everybody involved. But no, 100%. And like the phrase that people get really worried about is testing in production. They're like, oh, but
yeah.
testing, like, but then you don't care about quality, you don't care about your users. And the thing about it is like we never said don't test before production. Like,
Mhm.
first of all, like test as much as you can and should before production. But what we acknowledge is that to your point about your environments, things will be different in live. Like,
Yeah.
so first of all, if we care about the planet, we shouldn't be running with the exact same scale in the lower environments as we do with the upper environments. If you care about your data protection, you can't be running with the same data as in the production as in the staging, although there's lots of great ways to produce data that is mimics and is similar. And you can't change how people are going to use it in the future, right? So this is that unknown situation. So I think observability data is in many ways um, the thing that you are able to validate with your tests, whether that be
Mhm.
pre or post production. And I think in both cases, it's really important to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. It gives you this sort of um is it confidence the word that I'm looking for? But it gives you that sort of feeling that when you deploy something in production, because I think before, when observability is still not as big, we're just like trying to pass it over, to a different team, and then like fingers crossed, like hope for the best. And there's a lot of like uncertainties, and at least now, like, you get a full picture of, okay, if I deploy this feature, and maybe we'll use like other techniques like feature flags, or like blue green deployments, just to help sort of make sure that the deployment is as safe. At least now we can have that observation as well of, okay, if I turn this feature flag on, is this gonna impact a number of users that we weren't able to catch during our testing? Because, like, we only have finite resources. Like, I'm sure all of us here would want to test as much as we can, but with deadlines, like time is limited, like, the costs as well, we have to prioritize like our testing. And I think that testing in production, via observing your system, I think that really gives you a lot of insights into, okay, our team might have missed this, let's prioritize that as part of our next sort of like sprint cycle, or whatever. So at least it's sort of like a loop wherein the data from production informs your testing, and then vice versa as well.
Yeah, I think the point you were raising there is that um, everybody has new learnings in production. If you
Mhm.
are concerned about those learnings, you can use your release process to reduce the risk of impact,
Yeah.
right? So you can choose to release as you mentioned a blue green. So turn it on, like be able to like test it before shifting traffic over to it. But that's pretty large scale in the sense of like it tends to be like blue green tends to indicate like it's all over, like everything's coming over, and that might be still too much risk for you. So maybe you want to do something like a canary release. So you start to say like I'm going to roll out a little bit, like 10% of my traffic to it, make sure everything's looking okay, and then up those percents. That might still be too much risk to you because there might be certain users that if they hit that canary and they get caught by it, don't care that it's only 10% of traffic. That user,
Mhm.
that's a problem. So then you might want to talk about doing like alpha releases where only certain customers get access. So there's all sorts of things you can do to basically say the risk of something happening in production that we aren't expecting is too great for us. We can't have that. Okay, what is how do we reduce that? It can be that we just never release new software because it's too great. If we change it, things could go wrong. It's probably not the right answer. So then the answer becomes, all right, how fast do you need to move and where's your risk levels and how do we make the release process enable us to do the pace of delivery that you need within the risk levels that you've defined. There's lots of options.
Yeah.
Well, we've pointed out that there are a lot of similarities between observability and testing. Even the way that we're talking about these deployments, it's very, you can say that it's observability, it's about deployment, and it's about continually checking the data that comes from those deployments to those particular users. But you can also say that there is a testing aspect of it, where you're trying one thing and then you're trying another. And really, I think sometimes that the differences are too, I mean, there are differences, but maybe sometimes it's more damaging to dwell on those differences than helpful. I like how you said earlier that when you're learning, you can go in depth, or you could go up and get a bigger picture, or you could spread out and be like, and really understand, have a broader understanding. As a breadth person, I find that it can be very restrictive to think of like testing or observability. And I'm like, but but I can't talk, especially performance testing in particular. I feel like that really straddles the two, and it's like I don't want to choose. I want to just be focused on quality. And that makes both of those practices essential. And I don't want to have to label when I'm doing testing and when I'm doing observability or platform engineering. And sometimes I think pushing people to label it that way, label their activities, almost hinders the the real focus on quality.
I can't agree more. I think one of the things I do the most, probably the most common thing I do, is try and widen people's Google foo by introducing them to terms that a different part of the industry might use for the same exact concept. And that's one of the things I should say that everyone does for me as well when I reach out to people and say, I don't understand this. Can you help me? Often the reason I can't find information, the right information or the information I'm looking for, is because I don't know what to look for. And that's because the words are fundamentally different and there are silos between these bits of the industry. And I don't have a great solution for this other than like more conversations like this that help us define and identify those shared aspects so that more and more people start to blend, and as more people blend, the vocabulary will start to blend, and then hopefully the resources will start to be more cross applicable, and things like that. But um yeah, yes. Sorry, I'm very long-winded sometimes, but yes, I agree with you completely. I've run into that problem as well.
No, it's great. I totally understand what you mean, because I know SREs talk a lot about thresholds and SLOs, for example.
Mhm,
Well, testers have had that too. We call them assertions or verifications. Yeah, they're on different levels, but conceptually they're the
mhm,
same. And once you understand that, testers immediately know intuitively what an SLO is and what a threshold is.
mhm.
It might be, typically applied to different things, but conceptually it's the same. It's having criteria to say whether something is okay or something isn't okay.
Yep. And how much not okay are you willing to deal with? Are you okay with that test being reran in CI 5 times before you determine that the
Yeah.
the build is broken, or only 3 times? Like it's that's an example of like breaking an SLO possibly, right? So we're saying these tests are SLI, our indicator, our data, and we are saying that our threshold is, or like that our objective is to have 100% passing, and that we are willing to be okay with reruns within a certain amount, but at a certain point we call that nope, no good anymore.
Mhm.
uh maybe it's not quite the perfect
Yeah.
alignment, but it's in that. I think you're right in the sense that it's very much aligned in the same way. And if we brought those worlds together, I think those examples would become a lot more aligned, right? We would start using the language. We would start finding ways to improve our work on both sides of
Mhm.
that equation. There isn't a better or worse. There's just a different right now. So yeah.
Yeah. I really love like your points, Nicole and Abby, because I think with the evolving role now of testers, like some might argue like, oh wow, like now if I want to be a quality engineer, I need to know some code, I need to do expert testing, I need to learn about observability. But then once like we actually talk about the differences between and the mainly the similarities between testing and observability, like the terms are different, but like the both of you said, the concepts are quite similar. So even if you're just a beginner in observability, I think there's still a lot of value for testers to contribute to these discussions. So information should not be like gate kept into just one group. More like collaboration, I think, is always better, because like both of these set of people are just trying to, I guess, fix the same problem, but there's probably going to be some small differences, but at the end I think the end goal is the quality of the application. So yeah, I think just some advice out there, if you're trying to learn observability, like I think there's still a lot of value even if you're coming from such a beginner level perspective. So try and contribute to like discussions like with your team, and just speak to like your SREs, or I guess if you have like platform engineers as well, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of value if you just start, yeah, speaking and communicating.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think when you say we have shared goals, I think our shared goal is quality, our shared goal is happy customers, our shared goal is
Yeah.
successful companies. Like, these are all our shared goals. And I think that maybe a qualifier on those goals is we want to do those things, and we want to do them efficiently, and we want to do them pragmatically, and we want to do them happily, right? Like, these are things that we would like to be true as well as being capitalistly successful. And I think when you have these silos and you have like one person worrying about observability and production, or one team or one area of the business, you have one team area of the business person worrying about pre-production quality, the likelihood that that is being done inefficiently, so therefore like having overlap, is very high. The
Mm-hmm.
likelihood that that's not being done as pragmatically as we can, probably likely high. The likelihood that either side is struggling to cover some cases that are actually best suited to the other side, likely pretty high. And so all of a sudden, like, the things that make us as individuals happy, not just capitalistly successful, making money, customers paying for things, etc., but us being happy and successful within our jobs, are the things that we're not prioritizing, are the things that we're not doing if we don't bring those two sides together. So yeah, I think Nicole and Marie, you both talked about like kind of this umbrella quality of outcome, that I think if we are speaking in those ways, we're just in such a better spot all around as a business and as individuals.
I also wanted to share this blog post that you wrote, Abby,
Oh, that's
because I think it would be very useful for anyone who wants to get started with observability, especially if you're a tester, because I think you have like a list of resources here, and just like some thoughts on the difference between mindsets and attitudes when getting into observability. I think that it is a little bit of a switch, but it's also less of a switch than you might think. I mean, technically there are things to learn, there are new tools and that kind of thing, but also I think the you will if you are a tester, you will find a lot of similar concepts in observability
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I think if you're right that it's both very approachable, or attainable, I should say, even if it feels like there's a lot there, but also, can feel like a lot. I think the biggest switch, in my opinion, is less the tools. Like, if you can learn, I don't know, name your cucumber, like as a testing tool, you can learn like JMeter as a testing tool, you can learn like Prometheus in the observability side. So I don't think it's the tools in my opinion,
Yeah.
because either you're someone who learns the technical tools or you're not. In either case, that's fine, but you'll port that across. For me, the biggest shift in my learning and in my journey was having to stop thinking about, does my feature work? Like, as in, I can run a single instance of my machine, I can hit it, and with perfect internet connection and everything's working, to does the system work at the
Mhm.
scale that is in production? So what happens when networking becomes slow, or
Yeah.
which is actually worse than being completely cut sometimes, right? What happens when you have, 10 servers running your application and not just one, or 1,000 servers, right? But once you get to 10, you're sort of at that problem space. What happens when you have backups going on your database, and potentially recoveries going on? Like, these system level problems are things that I think SREs tend to be thinking a lot about.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it was a fairly natural move for me, even though there was a huge learning curve to go that direction, because it was still the same theory, still the same idea, but it was a lot of systems learning. It was a lot of architectural learning, and it was these stepping outside the box of a single running application to an entire system. And if that's something that's interesting to you as a QA, it's very much, as I said,
Mhm.
attainable. But that's the thing that's going to really challenge you to get to that kind of SRE observability space. Not even observability, you can do observability on a single instance, the SRE space, really.
Yeah.
You're talking about observability of systems, but I think it would be also super interesting to zoom out even more and include ourselves in those systems, the people side of
Mhm.
it. You know,
Socio-technical
how
systems.
yeah, like how do we make ourselves and our work observable? I think there is something, on a maybe this is a little philosophical, but there is a lot about our work that is about communicating those results. This is what we are doing. This is the value that we are providing. There's also the education aspect of it. Like I was saying earlier, that just having a single source of truth for people can already in itself be not just informing, but changing the behavior of people without explicitly telling them to. And I know that you have done a lot of community work as well to make your work observable and to encourage others to make their work observable. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's so interesting. So, yeah, I think observable work made me think about how you were talking about these different communities. They actually do a lot of overlap, and we were originally talking about kind of testing and observability, or production things. But it made me think about like the agile movement along, and its alignment, and how many things we've done within the agile movement around Kanban flow, around making work visible. There's like literally books that are amazing on this topic. Making work in progress visible in order to drive visibility of things, and not work in progress being visible was something that I found really helpful a few years ago. And that just, yeah, that just really sparked for me of like, this is another um completely different vocabulary, completely different use case, but is actually challenging a lot of the same challenges, or attacking a lot of the same challenges. For me personally, my community work, I've never thought about it honestly as making my work visible. I've always thought of it as very selfishly getting to talk to so many amazing people. Like, that is literally, I run a meetup in London called Coffee Ops. Um, the history behind that, it's about, I don't know, 8 years, 6 years old, 7 years old, something like that. The history behind it is that Jennifer Davis, who's based on the west coast of the U.S., runs a meetup called Coffee Ops, and it's got sort of global, you know, pockets that run it as well. And I just wanted to be able to talk to her, so I was like, "Hey, Jen, would you like to run this while you're in London for this conference in a few weeks?" She's like, "I don't know London, so I can't run it." Fair. But I'd be happy to come if you want to run it. And I was like, okay. And so I just thought it'd be a one-off situation. And then on stage at that conference, she's like, "By the way, Abby is the London host for Coffee Ops." And I was like, I
Oh,
guess
that's
I gotta
sneaky.
start paying meetup.com. Like, here we go. And so And what that meetup, the reason I wanted to do that with Jennifer, and the reason I'm very, very happy to still be running it this many years later, is because that meetup is a little bit different. There's no agenda, there's no speakers ever. It is always a lean coffee format. So you bring your topics, you bring yourselves, and we talk about the things that matter to the group. So a couple of weeks ago was we were aligned with a conference around AI, and most of the topics were around AI. Last week, we had a whole bunch of people that were more from the software development side of things, and we talked a lot about software development practices in relation to platform engineering and DevOps and those things. Whoever shows up is the right people. We have the conversation that's right for them, and so yes, so I've never thought about as making my work observable. I have to admit, it's always been a little bit more selfish than that. Cool people for cool conversations.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it doesn't have to be altruistic, right? I think making something observable also inherently has a level of vulnerability. You are still putting yourself out there. It's not easy. It's not no work to run a meetup. And it's, there is a vulnerability in saying that you are the host, you are bringing people together. And there's always the risk of like people saying, oh, who are you to be doing this? But,
Mhm.
I think you have to get over that. And then you get to reap all the benefits too of, once you are observable, it encourages others to be observable too. And everyone gets the benefit from that.
I really
Yeah.
like that. Thank you for that perspective. I really like that.
Yeah. I think like this sort of format as well encourages people from different disciplines just to hear, perspectives. Because like if you're, let's say for example, a software tester, like I think the tendency is for us to always attend testing conferences because that's where we're most comfortable with. But I think there's still um added value if you attend a conference, specific for developers or SREs, because there's still some topics there that might still resonate with you as a tester, but attending a big conference like that might be too overwhelming for you. So I agree, like this sort of format, like small group, there's no agenda, really encourages everyone to just raise their own topics and yeah, talk about that amongst the group. So yeah.
I think that
Abby
point
actually
about
does work around that, right? I just wanted to plug that as well. Can you talk to us about tech voices?
Oh yes, tech voices. So um, that was actually how I started conference speaking. So I've just passed my 10-year anniversary of speaking at conferences, and the first time I ever spoke was in the support was supported by this community tech voices, and I had an amazing mentor who helped me prepare for the talk and make sure I was ready both emotionally and technically for what was to come. And yeah, so I've been a part of that organization. I have to admit, I've been a little bit distant from it of recent. Marette is an amazing ambassador for that, and really runs that program. And I want to give full credit to her and what she does with that. But it's the hard part was always scaling it. And I tried working, that was one of the things that we tried to work on the most was how do you get this thing so it isn't based on a single person helping to make connections, but you do so in a really safe way. Because what we don't want to have happen is have anyone in a bad situation where they feel like their relationship with their mentor is abusive in any way, or that they're kind of stuck in that world. And how do you do that with data privacy, and how do you and so we really got a little bit bamboozled, if I'm honest, on how to scale that bigger, and that's why it's really fallen, and Marette has done such a great job with it. So um but yeah, I think that the big thing here is that there is a lot of learning to be had, and I saw a quote at one point that if you know three musical notes, you can teach someone who knows two. And I think if we all think in that way, and we all think that we do have something to share, even if we are not ourselves experts, and we are very humble by that fact that we ourselves are not experts,
Yeah.
then we can always be bringing other people along, and building up a network of people that will hopefully supersede and come back and teach you things. And that's happened more times than I can count, where I've introduced a topic to someone and shared with them what I knew, and they've gone off and that's been their passion. They've gone off and they've really dug deep into it and come back around to teach me in the future. And there's nothing better than that, like getting learnings in that way. So
You're also a CNCF ambassador. We recently had Nikki Manoladaki, who Marie mentioned earlier. She's also CNCF ambassador, but can you tell us a little bit about what that actually entails?
Oh, I think Nikki could tell us a bit more than I could. See, this is the two notes. I think I might know one note, and you might be at zero notes, but I can still share. So I just recently have been accepted into the program as of this spring, and so I'll be a part of a group of, I think it's 240 people globally who are all also ambassadors. And from my experience thus far, only about a month in, I can just see that it's a really supportive group. So that idea of building a community that can help teach you and help elevate you and help you grow while also being really absorbing of your own offerings and what you can share and what you can do. That's what I've learned so far. And I think all of our shared goals, the shared ambassador goals, is around building that kind of inclusive community that we have within the 240 of us. How big can we make that in public? So how much can we make the cloud native community inclusive and a warm and learning environment for people? Can we make that 10 times as big as the ambassador group, 100 times, 1,000 times as big, and do so through kind of sharing what we know and sharing our experiences and our culture? And so that's my read of it so far, and I'm sure I will learn more and be able to update you more in the next year. So
What did you have to do to become an ambassador?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, yeah.
Oh.
uh ask so there's probably two sides to that question. There's the physical, like, hey, how do I apply to be an ambassador? And there's an application form. It's really, really simple, actually. Not a very big barrier to entry. Hey, tell us what you do in the community, and that's about it.
Mm.
So that's the easy part, maybe, or maybe the hard part, right? Sometimes putting yourself forward for things can be the hard part. So the other side is, what do you do that you would put into that form? What do you do with the community? And I would say that the number one thing that I probably was, selected for, or they saw value in, is that I'm a co-lead of a working group within the CNCF. So the CNCF has um, a group that you might be able to think of as being part of, like, the office of the CTO in a weird way, in the sense that it does trickle down all the way from the CTO in the CNCF. CTO has a group that is the true office of the CTO, who helps decide where investment goes within the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and where support is needed and that kind of thing. But there's a lot in there, and that group of, I think, kind of 8 to 10 people, I think, they need support. And so they have a community that they call technical advisory groups that are subject matter experts, and they can feed into that group. And the technical advisory groups span different topics. So we've got, for example, networking and security. And the one I'm in is app delivery. So what does it look like to actually deliver applications in a cloud native way? That in itself is still a big topic. And so, way down the chain, there are these things called working groups, which are the least durable. So they tend to turn over more frequently, but they are focused on generating value for the community within a subject. And in our case, the working group is around platforms and platform engineering, and we create content and community engagement around that. The two most known things that we've done is that we released a white paper about platform engineering and a platform engineering maturity model. And we are in the works about some more deeper dives into platform as a product, as a concept, and into maybe the next level of detail behind the maturity model. So lots of interesting things.
Well, we are almost out of time, but we wanted to ask you one more question. If you were talking to a woman or some other underrepresented group member who wanted to get started in observability, and maybe they're a tester or just in tech in general, what would one piece of advice be that you would give them?
It's funny because all my favorite humans in observability, maybe not quite all, but nearly all, would be considered part of an underrepresented group. So it's funny how that can work itself out. Um, I think that the most challenging part is feeling like you're in an alien world. So if you can find a friendly face somewhere, to just be a dictionary for you, if nothing else. Like, this word, what? What do you mean by this? And this is that translation I was talking about earlier. Oh, that word, oh, that's not important. This is the 4 other ways that people talk about that. Oh, I didn't realize that was the same as that. Okay, I actually have already researched that and I feel comfortable there. Okay, great. That kind of uh, check for yourself, that kind of safety net of not feeling like you're crazy, or that kind of feeling of not feeling welcome somewhere, is often really small amounts of effort from a mentor, because it can be just an asynchronous, what's this word, oh, that's it, but really, really impactful for a learner. So at least in my experience, that's been true on both sides of that equation.
That's really great advice, and I'm happy that now we're connected and now you're part of our community too.
Yeah.
Absolutely, me as well.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. It's been a great conversation.
I
Yeah.
really appreciate you both making the time.
Thank you as well, Abby. I know like you're busy, so really grateful that you've spent some time with us and educate people around observability, and your amazing career background as well, and the stuff that you've been doing like on your side. Like I don't know how you juggle all of these, but you're really inspiring.
Oh, thank you so much, and you both as well. I've never been able to foray into hosting podcasts. I think that in itself, I'm in awe perpetually. But no, I like to consider myself an open door, an open book. So please do find me. I think LinkedIn is right now the best place to DM me or direct message me. But you can find me on pretty much all the socials, and yeah, happy to hear your stories, answer questions, and just widen all of our networks by meeting each other. So please do come say hi.
All of Abby's contact links are in the description below. Thank you everyone for watching. Marie, do you want to talk about why you won't be around for a while?
Well, I think I'm hoping that next week we can still record one more
Oh,
episode,
that's
and
right.
I was sort of thinking that could be like a wrap up of Adobo and Avocados, because we've been doing this for over a year. Really, really grateful that we've managed to speak to a lot of amazing guests. So I'm hoping we can do like a recap, a reflection, and then after that I'll be off for a while because I'll be going on my maternity leave. So
Yay!
different like priorities this time. So I'm really happy that I get to do this podcast slash live stream with you, Nicole, and the opportunity just to learn and speak to different amazing people
Yeah.
that yeah and it's great because we have a platform to amplify their contributions as well. So
All right. Well, if we don't show up next week, it's because Marie's new baby wanted to come into the world a little earlier than planned.
yeah,
But
hopefully
thank
not.
you everyone for watching. Hopefully we'll still be here next week. But
Yeah.
have a great week, everyone. Thank you again,
You
Abby, for joining
all.
us.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye.